Anyhow, so Jon Stewart, he was interviewing J.K. Rowling. And J.K. Rowling makes reference to red areas. He talks about red areas. And J.K. Rowling's talking about red areas. And Jon Stewart says, oh, and she says, you know, in Britain, red is the left wing, and blue, that's the right wing. And Jon Stewart says, huh. He said, in the USA, the blue is the left wing, and the red is the right wing. Why do you think that is? And then J.K. Rowling says, I don't know. Who knows? Why would that be? You know, and they just sit there and ponder it for a second. Why would red be the left wing in Britain? And I'm sitting there, and my head was about to explode. I was about ready to, like, punch my television. You know why? It should be obvious why red is left wing in Britain. The Labour Party. Socialism. Marxism. So, I mean, it was infuriating. And that moment struck me. It struck me, that moment, how much the ideology of Marxism has just been blotted out. People have no clue. People have no clue. On national television, two of the smartest, what are supposed to be the smartest minds, right? One of the most best-selling authors in the world, and a guy who had, you know, 4 nights a week, top-viewed show in the United States, interviewing authors of the best book. Neither of them had any clue why the Labour Party might be red. I mean, that shows how much the ideology of Marxism and how much the history of socialism has been blotted out. And that shows why things like this live are so damn important. I apologize for the swearing. It shows why they're important, because he had no idea. Neither did she, right? You know, that socialism, red flag, Karl Marx, British Labour Party, the theme song of the British Labour Party. The theme song of the British Labour Party. The people's flag is deepest red, it's shrouded oft our martyr dead. And ere their limbs grew stiff and cold, our hearts blood-eyed its every fold. Then raised the scarlet standard high, within its shade we live and die. Though cowards flinch and traitors sneer, we'll keep the red flag flying here. The red flag, socialism, the British Labour Party, come on! And neither of them knew that. That was horrifying to me, and that shows how important what we're doing here is. The other moment that was very important for me is Jon Stewart was interviewing an author. I don't remember who it was. I don't remember which book. There's a lot of books about China these days, and back then, you know, this was 5-6 years ago. So he's interviewing the author of a book about China. And the author of the book is trying to explain what China's like. And Jon Stewart says, you know, there was this part in your book where you were interviewing this young Chinese woman, and it was just absurd. She's saying that in order to have communism in China, we have to have capitalism. I mean, that's just crazy. I mean, who could even think of such a thing? And it's like they're ridiculing the idea, you know, which is the line of the Chinese Communist Party, that you need to have capitalism in order to have socialism. And they can't understand it. You know, Anyone who's read Marx knows that you have to have capitalism before you can have socialism. The entire ideology of Marxism is about history speeding forward, right? That first we had hunter-gatherer civilization. That was the overwhelming majority of human history. And then we had the origin of private property and feudalism and slavery. And then, starting in the 1400s up until like the 1700s and the 1800s, we had the capitalist revolutions that overturned feudalism and created capitalism. And that socialism is the next stage. That yes, you must have capitalism first in order to have socialism. That capitalism raises the level of productivity and the means of production to the point that then you can have socialism, right? Just like you had to have feudalism before you could have capitalism. Just like you had to have hunter-gatherer civilization before you could have feudalism, right? That history is like a train speeding forward. Jon Stewart apparently had never heard of this. And this guy who's an expert, who's writing a book on China, he apparently had never heard this. And when some young woman in China tried to explain that to him, that basic understanding of Marxism, that basic, you know, Marxist concept, tried to explain to him, you know, that history advances and you have to have one stage before you can have the next stage. They just sit there, oh, this is absurd, right? You've got to have capitalism before you have communism. Oh, what is this? Is this like the stupidest thing I've ever... You can tell that people have no clue about Marxism. The ideas that we discuss here on these YouTube lives, people haven't got a clue about them, right? They are completely out to lunch. And that's why what we're doing here is so important. So if you haven't tweeted this out or shared it or invited other people to join this conversation, now's the time to do it, because no one else is going to do it, right? The smartest people in the USA have no clue about the Marxist concept of historical progress. The smartest people in the world have no idea where the British Labour Party came from or why they might have red as their color. What we're doing here is super important, because what Marxists believe and the Marxist understanding of human history has been so widely diluted and so erased. People think, when I was in school, they taught us that socialism was the idea that everyone should get paid the same wage no matter how hard they work, right? No matter how hard they work, they get paid the same wage. And then, of course, they said to us, that wouldn't be fair. I mean, if you work hard and get an A, why should we give you a B just because Johnny is lazy? Oh, that's why socialism is bad. That's what people think about socialism and communism in the United States. People don't have a clue. They don't have a clue, right? I mean, and you get these people that just say all these kinds of outrageous things. For example, no one ever invented anything in the USSR. Well, I've got news, or my favorite. Here's my favorite, right? People say, oh, how can you believe in socialism when you have a cell phone? Do you know where the first cell phone was invented? I'll give you a hint. It's a country that rhymes with Oviet and Union. Soviet Union, right? The Soviet Union developed the first cell phone. You can look that up. The first cellular phone was developed in the Soviet Union, right? Yeah, I mean, you can go through the line. I did a video earlier this week. People think socialism never builds anything. Well, the biggest hydroelectric power plants in world history were built by socialism, and not just the Dnieper Dam in the Ukraine, not just the Three Gorges Dam in China, which today is the biggest hydroelectric facility, but also the Aswan Dam in Egypt, which was built by the Arab socialist Abdel Nasser in coordination with support from the Soviet Union. Khrushchev called it the eighth wonder of the world. Socialism in Libya built the biggest irrigation system in world history, the Great Man-Made River, it was called, and then it was blown up by NATO bombs. I mean, socialism has built, more high-speed railway than any other system in the world. I mean, China has more high-speed railway at this point than any other country in the world combined. Socialism invented space travel. This idea that socialism failed, and here's the problem. You get a lot of people that are like, well, I don't want to, I'm afraid that if I believe in socialism, people are going to think that I want to make a society like the USSR, and I don't want people to think that. But here's the thing. You can be critical of the USSR. You can say that there were things in the USSR that weren't good, which there were, right? The USSR was far more authoritarian than it should have been. The USSR had big problems. China today, they're the first to tell you that they have big problems. They're moving ahead in terms of human rights, but they've got difficulties and problems. They've got problems with corruption. That's why President Xi is waging the crackdown. You can say that Cuba has problems, but if you don't recognize... See, the narrative that people in the USA have about socialism is that everywhere socialism has ever been tried, all it led to is people starving and dying and blowing up and being put in death camps and killed. And if you believe that, if everywhere socialism has ever been tried, that happened, they would be right. Yeah, they would be absolutely right. If all socialism did anywhere, was just make things worse, they would have a point. But it didn't, right? The Soviet Union became a world superpower. It electrified the whole country. It brought running water to the whole country. It wiped out illiteracy. It created huge universities. It raised the standard of living astoundingly high. China has become a global superpower with socialism. 700 million people lifted out of poverty. You can go down the line. Cuba's healthcare system, for example. And if you write all of that off, then you're back to that original thing. Well, all that socialism ever achieved was making people miserable. And nobody is ever convinced by that wasn't real socialism. No one's convinced by that because it's not honest. Some countries can be socialist and have problems, and we should be honest about their problems. And that's a mistake I think I made in the past. I think at one point I was, over-glorifying some of the socialist countries, and I wasn't honest about some of their setbacks. But it's better than the other mistake, because most people that believe in socialism, they just want to write off the 20th century. And, you know, well, the 20th century happened. I'm sorry, it happened. And you need to be frank about what went on there. Socialist economics works, and that was proved in the 20th century. And Russia and China's position in the world today is pretty solid proof of that. Did bad things happen in socialist countries? You betcha. Bad things happened. And we can admit that, and that doesn't really, it's not really relevant. The notion that the socialist economic system does not work and has never worked anywhere in the world, which is constantly repeated, not just by libertarians, not just by right-wingers, by leftists. All kinds of people believe this, right? You get a lot of people that are like, well, you know, Marxism, we should never read Marx because it failed. I mean, everyone knows it just failed. And no, I mean, if you buy that argument, you should give up, right? That needs to be defeated. No amount of, well, that wasn't real socialism is going to work, right? Because these countries did not have economies that ran according to profits. They had state control economies, and they did great things, right? This notion that we have to have private capitalists just making profits, it's not the case, right? And if you just